Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Development Control meeting. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Please note this meeting is being webcast live on the internet. And could everybody please turn their phones off or put them on silent? Thank you. For the benefit of members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I would like to explain who everyone is. My name is Councillor Nick Robinson and I am Chairman of this committee. To my right are councillors who will be making the decisions on the applications on this evening's agenda. To my immediate right and left are officers who will be presenting the applications and providing advice to the committee. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee, not a political meeting. The committee will be considering the published papers, examining the evidence brought before us tonight, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting in the order set out in the update paper. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and to keep points made on the application on material reasons only. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and to keep any comments on each planning application to a maximum of 4 minutes. This evening, I think we have 8 applications on the agenda, and I anticipate, I hope, to be finished by 9 o'clock-ish. I understand that planning can be emotive and ask that everyone remains polite and professional throughout this meeting. Thank you. Apologies for absence and substitutions. I have 2. I have apologies from Councillor Goderson and from Councillor Harvey. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest tonight? No. Thank you very much. Urgent matters. I have none. No. Okay. Minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of March and on the 12th of April. I move that the minutes are correct. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor McCormick. Thank you. Right. Applications for planning. Item 1. Land at Hansom Fields, junction of Winchester Road and Trenchards Lane, Dummer.
Thank you, Chair. This is a full planning application for the construction of 2 gypsy and traveller pitches, both independently serviced with an amenity building, large trailer and touring caravan with parking, landscaping and engineering associated works. This is a full application with the outline permission 15/04503/OUT for up to 750 houses and associated land uses, including the allocation for 2 gypsy and traveller pitches having previously been granted. In terms of update, the applicant has confirmed that the hedge fronting Trenchards Lane is within their land ownership. Clarification has also been received from the agent regarding the extent of engineering works as follows, which is for the creation of the new access onto Trenchard Lane, creation of passing bay on the lane, laying of hard surfaces and general earthworks within the site, and provision of drainage and associated utility infrastructure. All of these would fall within the term engineering operations for the purposes of the planning application. There were further objection letters which have also been received, raising similar concerns amongst other matters which are detailed in the update paper. The application is recommended for approval, subject to a deed of variation of the Section 106 agreement and conditions listed at pages 123 and 138 of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethan. If we could have our first speaker to the chairs, please, and that's Councillor J. Jones. Good evening, Councillor Jones. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining. And I'm sure you know which button it is by now on the microphone.
Right. Good evening. The application you have before you is the result of a dysfunctional planning department with a constant churn of planning officers and a cynical development who never wanted these pitches and did not accept your policy CN5 and his responsibilities under that policy. The developer waited for years until the new planning officer was appointed and approved the final housing allocation before bringing this application to committee. It is an application that minimises the impact on the developer and harms everybody else. The settled community, especially Southwood Farm and its tenants, nature by ripping out a section of mature hedge and facing up the remainder. Its proximity to the allotments, which should have been on the site instead of this gypsy pitch. It's a concern. The relative ground height on this sloping site. It endangers pedestrian on the local footpaths, the Wayfarers Walk and the Camino de Santiago. And for the travellers and gypsies, it is an isolated site, dangerous especially for their children because of the commuter traffic on Trenchard Lane. There's no provision of footpaths, it's remote from schools, shops, public transport and other facilities. Despite the long gestation period, this application is incomplete. This is partly due to the fact that the location was and its dimensions were changed, but it doesn't explain emissions. There is no indication of the levelling required or whether the retaining wall will be necessary. There's no mention of the unshielded high-tension cables that run over the site or of the pole that supports the low-voltage supply to the cottages that stands inside the site, and its stay is in the hedge that appears to stand in the visibility area. There's no indication of the route for foul water sewage on its way across the easement area of the oil pipeline. There's no clear specification of the acoustic fence and its dimensions. The swept paths do not indicate how caravans would actually manoeuvre into position. The work is incomplete. Conditions will not resolve all these shortcomings. Policy CN5 is meant to benefit travellers and gypsies. This application fails to achieve that, and I urge you to refuse it.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions for Councillor Jones? No? Thank you very much. If we could have Mr. M. Gill and Mr. W. Jones, please. Good evening to you both. You have 4 minutes between you, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and it's the right-hand button. You can sit in position 2. Both microphones will work. It's the right-hand button on the deck. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, I'm Will Jones. I live at the entrance to Southwood Farm. The area in question is a very popular walking and cycling spot with public footpaths no more than 20 to 30 metres from the proposed entrance used by dog walkers for families with young children. Despite this, no measures are proposed to improve cycling or walking facilities in the area, which only increase the dangers to them. The pedestrianisation of the area will continue to increase as the local development grows and people seek the countryside footpaths as their leisure time. As mentioned, not only does this pose a danger to pedestrians, but also to the residents of the proposed development, which is locking them into vehicle dependency and further segregating the residents on that site. The traffic survey that was carried out on Trenchards Lane, did it take into account things such as icy conditions, torrential rain, or the increase in traffic due to local annual festivals? With the recent B&E part of the driving licence now being scrapped, this will broadly mean that anyone with a car licence will be able to tow a trailer weighing up to 3.5 tonnes along this small, unsuitable road with the need for difficult manoeuvres in the best of driving conditions, which are not taken into account in inclement weather or high traffic volumes. Even at low speeds, 3.5 tonnes can cause a lot of damage to other road users, let alone pedestrians and cyclists. At 35 miles an hour, there is a 1 in 3 chance that pedestrians will be killed, which has been recorded on the survey. Is this development suggesting that it's an acceptable risk to the local pedestrians who have had no provision considered to keep them safe? The obvious increase in pedestrians having to use the road as a footpath, along with the increase of large vehicles, will mean it's a matter of time before the serious incident occurs. Thank you.
Good evening. Why has the developer not integrated the two traveller pitches into their development? Large strategic housing developments such as Hanson Fields and the golf course should provide integrated traveller sites, and the golf course has demonstrated this. The planning officer notes in the report, and I quote, "The fully enclosed nature of this site and its position on the edge of the wider Hanson Fields allocation would be contrary to parts of the requirements of policy CN5 and PPTS, such that the site would not be fully integrated with the Hanson Fields development and its associated facilities and services. So despite this, the site is still recommended for approval and parts of policy have been ignored." Situated at the far end of Hanson Fields with its 1.8 metre high surrounding fence and its own access onto the rat run of Trenchard's Lane, the traveller site is completely isolated from the shops, school and play areas. There is not a nearby bus route or a safe walking path to everyday facilities, which necessitates journeys by private car. Policy CN5. We must ask the question why the traveller site is not being routed through Hanson Fields, which would allow full integration and safe access. There is policy all-purpose vehicular access from the Winchester Road.
You have 1 minute remaining.
The entrance onto Trenchard's Lane has other implications. It's very narrow. The site design needs a large open area for a vehicle and trailer turning circle. Similar sites, this extra space is used up by 4 or 5 extra visiting caravans or a business setup. It will be overcrowded. And this is the reality of an isolated large site which was only intended for 2 pitches. The site will be sold freehold, a very undesirable outcome for nearby residents, Grade 2 listed Southwood Farmhouse and Wayfarers Walk. The developers should be encouraged to take full ownership of the problems of integration and access rather than placing them onto existing settled residents where successful integration has not been demonstrated. Policy CN5. And finally, as strategic Basingstoke gateway plans are not yet finalised, it would seem a little unwise to set a potentially large, non-integrated travellers site at its heart. Please vote against the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the speakers? No? Thank you very much. Could I have Councillor Diane Taylor, please? Good evening, Councillor Taylor. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. I'll try not to repeat what's already been said, but I will just say at the beginning that whatever highways may say, this is a dangerous proposal, especially with the increase in the uses of Trenchard's Lane as Oakley increases. So what I will do is I'm going to dive in with listing the extent to which these developers are hoping to take us for fools. The outline application for 750 dwellings was approved in September 2017. Here we are nearly 6 years later, following multiple approvals of phased reserve matters applications, left with the last hurrah, the Gypsy traveller pitches on the leftover bit of land. I wrote to the planning officer 2 years ago, flagging up this very possibility, that the whole site might be filled with houses and all that is left for the gypsies and travellers is this far-flung place that has no connection with the main estate. The intention is clearly that we, the planning authority, have no choice. What did the outline say? So the parameter plan, go on here, the parameter plan included in the approved outline application shows a brown hatched area adjacent to the neighbourhood centre, which, and I quote, denotes the location for residential uses and the provision of gypsy traveller pitches. There it is, right in the middle of the site. The access parameter plan included in the approved outline application shows vehicular access only along the A30. There is no vehicular access on Trenchard's Lane. So I leave it with you to decide, therefore, if this application that we're considering is in substantial accordance with the outline permission. And looking at our own policies, I'm sure you know policy CN5 only too well, but let's just look at the word integration. If the families who occupy this site want to access the school, the shop, the facilities, everything that's on the Hanson Field settlement, of which they're supposedly part, they have to drive out onto Trenchards Lane, they have to go up a branch of the A30, go onto the main A30, and then access the site via the main roundabout. Do you think they might feel a bit marginalised having to do this? There isn't even a road between their site and the estate. They are cut off from the estate. Does that demonstrate, and I quote the policy, the potential for successful integration between travelling and settled communities? Or does it demonstrate deliberate segregation by the developers who would rather not have gypsies and travellers in amongst their houses, as originally promised? As soon as this site was resurrected as the place for gypsies and travellers, I arranged a meeting with Hampshire's Gypsy and Traveller liaison officers. That was in August 2021. And it was very interesting to hear their views on policy. I don't feel free to report on that here, but I think you should talk to them yourself sometime.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. But the one aspect of establishing these pitches, or any pitches, that they were very keen to emphasise is that they must be properly managed by a person or organisation that is well acquainted with the needs and culture of the gypsy and traveller community. So what do we have here? And I quote, "The pitches proposed under the current application are for private sale, and therefore any inhabitant of the sites will be responsible for their management and upkeep." Anybody who happens to be there. Anybody who happens to buy it. So we're on the verge of buying into another potential peak COPS experience, and you all know what happened at peak COPS. Only this time, it's here amongst the houses and cottages of Southdown Farm and Ganderdown. So in summary, does this scheme fulfil our own policy? No. Does this scheme accord with the approved outline plan? No. Does this scheme serve the best interests of the surrounding community? No. Does this scheme serve the best interests of the gypsy and traveller community? No. Does this scheme serve the best interests of the developers? Yes. Over to you. And I would just say one thing. If you are mindful to approve, and I really, really hope you're not, please do consider changing the access from Trenchards Lane, blocking that off and allowing them to have access onto the main community. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you turn the microphone off, please? Questions for Councillor Taylor? No? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? Councillor Faulkner.
Yeah, can I have a guidance? I've not come across this situation before where on an old application this facility was part of that original application, but it was never, shall we say, enforced. And now we've got another application to address what was addressed in the original application 7 years ago. Does this stand alone, or are we, or do we take these two situations as one?
Thank you, Councillor Faulkner. So, in essence, just take the members through the history, I suppose. Outline planning permission was approved under the original Hanson scheme's proposal. That included the up to 750 dwellings and other facilities, including gypsies and travellers. The parameter plans that were associated with that outline application were part of the conditions to that application, which would mean that any subsequent reserved matters application which follows would have to be in substantial accordance with those. This is a full application, so at any point, anybody can apply for a different type of planning application, irrespective of the fact that it's on the position of the original outline. So, in essence, this planning application is not bound by those same conditions and those original parameters. It can't exceed 450 dwellings, which is the Section 106 requirement, which then requires the trigger for the gypsy and traveller pitches to be provided. So that is the link back to the original planning application.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Is there any way that we can stipulate that the access is changed so that it runs through the rest of the development rather than out onto Trenchard Lane? I know there is a pipeline there, but the pipeline goes under the A30, so it must surely be possible to have an estate road over the top of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowes. So, through the consideration of this application, you do need to consider it on the basis of the plans that are already there. You can't propose an alternative effectively.
Thank you.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard that this site abuts the allotments. Is it not normal that there's access to allotments? Would it not be possible to have a walkway through the allotments into the wider development or and onto the...
I think it's entirely possible, but it's not part of the proposal.
Councillor McCormick, followed by Councillor Tomlin.
I'm just wondering if any of the officers could advise what was the justification for putting this site where it is in Trenchard Lane and not having it direct access off the A30?
Councillor McCormack, I can't speak for the applicant in terms of any reason why they've proposed it. Effectively, it's an application that's been submitted. We're here to determine the application as submitted. We haven't had any position put forward as to why it's been put forward in the way that it has.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. So have we the power, the opportunity to go back to the agreed outline permission and say, if we were to reject this application, that they are still obliged to provide another scheme, obviously within those parameters? Obviously, they can do another scheme, but I mean, they cannot, if we refuse this, refuse to actually develop any scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. So I may seek Anne's input into this as well, but effectively the only tie back to the outline application is the Section 106 agreement, in terms of the fact that they are restricted to not exceeding 450 occupations on the main site until they have provided that. Again, I can't speak for the applicant in terms of what they would do in the event that this application wasn't approved, but that part of that 106 would still stand, and it would be for the applicant to demonstrate either compliance with it or to seek variation to it.
Sorry, supplementary there. So are we saying there is no planning or reason to, there is no reason that the applicant must comply with the outline permission that was granted?
That's correct. So effectively it would not be a substantive reason to refuse this application because it doesn't comply with what the original outline suggested.
Are there any more questions on this? Councillor Tomlin.
Sorry, this one then a detailed one. The construction of the site following our plan CM5, could you comment on why this site, if it was to be integrated, has to have fencing and security all around it? Because I don't notice that security around the dwellings of the houses that have been built on the site.
Thank you, Councillor. So again, it's effectively what's been proposed, so we don't have a position on that. The only thing I would say is that, as you'll see in the conditions, I think it's condition 9, there is a requirement for details of acoustic fencing, so there would be fencing of some sort in terms of the proposal to have it entirely enclosed. That is what has been submitted with the application.
I've got a question, just to clarify something. If this is refused tonight, my understanding, am I right, that the applicant cannot occupy more than 450 houses on Hounsome Fields until he has come back to us with an alternative proposal to provide the Gypsy and Traveller pitches in a form that does get approval?
I wouldn't say he can't occupy more than 450. The onus upon us would be to stop them occupying more than 450, and the only way we could do that would be to seek an injunction to prohibit occupation of the 451th house.
Any more questions? Debate? Councillor Freeman.
Personally, I don't like it. I don't think it serves the needs and wants of the traveller community at all. I do think it's very isolated. They're not integrated at all. And our own policies state that we should be trying to integrate these people into our communities, not sticking them right down the end of a development. I don't think it works for the current residents. It doesn't work for the traveller communities. I really think the developer needs to go away and do better.
Councillor Court.
Thank you, Chair. I think the bottom line here is it doesn't comply with CN5. It's as simple as that from what I can see. So, and it also summarises exactly what the councillor here has just said. So that would be my view too. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. I was on this council when in 2016 we approved the local plan which outlined where and when and how we would deliver gypsy and traveller pitches. We have subsequently failed the gypsy and traveller community wholeheartedly. The 5 on Manidown, undelivered. The likelihood of, from what my fellow councillors say, this site undelivered. The only thing that has leads me to think we've delivered something is on the one pitch on the golf course, which rightly it is properly integrated, and I thank Greg Chapman for his work on that to make sure that that was complied with on CN5. But my view is that we have failed so many times in the delivery of gypsy and traveller pitches. Our commitment at that time was for 8 pitches, and we've delivered 1. So I've read this application, and the reality is, if not here, where? Are some of the outlying areas to be targeted for illegal encampments because we couldn't deliver on our local plan? I have to think that would be the case. And I refer to a decision made last year in my own ward of Headley, where a small site has been passed for the erection of 4, much more than is in front of us tonight. The inspector made large points that we have under-delivered on gypsy and traveller pitches. Our requirements have not been met. That the site that he agreed was right for 4 pitches was on the edge of a settlement in Headley. In fact, it is closer to West Berkshire than to the village of Headley. He made a point that even in stretching into the countryside, there is no material harm on it. Now, I know we are looking at this application, but I think it is telling that we refer back to the latest view from an inspector. And I genuinely believe that at 1.4 miles in this case, that there has to be some provision made for these people. If we do not do it here, then where? When will Manidown deliver? I don't know. But all of the councillors who were on that full council meeting in 2016 voted for a local plan to deliver for our gypsy and traveller community. It's pointed out that Trenchard Lane is a busy lane. It is no more busy, of course, than the A339, which abuts the appeal site. And in my view, reference to Peaks Copse is over 20 years ago. I think we have to accept that the gypsy and traveller community are now much better at self-management than they were 20 years ago. The help that they get from Hampshire County Council ensures that they are better integrated, not just in terms of their physical position, but in their integration into schools and the doctors and people who will look after them. I genuinely believe that this application should be supported, and we have already approved the reasons to do so when we voted for that local plan. It is not perfect, and it is telling, in my view, that the applicant couldn't be bothered to turn up today to defend himself. But is it better that we throw away the good in the aim of attracting perfect? I do not believe it is, and I am happy to move the recommendation as it has not been done. Thank you.
Councillor Hussey, followed by Councillor Freeman.
Did officers consult on this application with any body that represents the Gypsy and Traveller community? We've heard in the debate tonight that this isn't suitable, it's not integrated, it's not this, it's not that, it's not whatever. Surely we ought to hear the views of the Gypsy community. Did we consult them?
No, Councillor Hussey, we didn't. We did consult Hampshire Gypsy and Traveller Liaison Officer.
With respect, they're not potential residents of this site. And in fact, they refuse to comment anyway because they no longer have a statutory responsibility according to this. So I think we've missed a trick there. We should have had their views. This is a very small site, and I can't see that there will be any difficulties. But I was looking through a few notes before this meeting, and 2 years ago in Cornwall, they spent 1.75 million on a traveller site. And the traveller community refused to use it. I've not read any further, I don't know why, but they were not consulted before the site was completed. And it seems to me that as we've not consulted here, we're second guessing what that community needs. Surely their views, when we're trying to put words in their mouth in this debate, their views are essential. But I agree wholeheartedly with what Councillor Rattigan has said. We should go ahead, but I would like to see officers get in touch with some representative body to make certain that the internal design of the site and its location is suitable before any money is spent on developing the site.
And Councillor Hussey, just to answer that particular question, ultimately we wouldn't be able to then consult with anyone, not least because I guess there could be potentially multiple bodies who would be involved, plus the fact that it's being put forward as a privately owned site, so it would depend ultimately on the individual user. The only thing that we can enforce against ultimately is the requirements of the original 106 in terms of the space requirements, and this site actually exceeds those space requirements. So I do understand the point you're referencing, but it's not something that would be within the control of this committee or council to do so.
Okay, I've got two more speakers with their hands up. You have seconded it. Thank you. That was going to be my question. Councillor Freeman.
Well, I totally agree with the need to provide traveller pictures. We run the risk of providing second-rate traveller pictures that aren't going to want to be used. Councillor Hussey makes a very good point that we haven't consulted anyone from the community to find out whether it's what they need, what they want, which I think is a massive error on our part. But it's why should this seems to be like something that's tacked on at the end, an afterthought. No person, no community wants to be thought of as an afterthought. Really, it doesn't seem to me to have been adequately thought through. It won't be properly managed, and again, because it's freehold, we do run the risk of ending up in a situation like Peak Copse. I am heavily supportive of traveller communities, and I believe they have the right to live the lifestyle that they choose. I also believe we should be providing adequately for them and not giving them second-rate, afterthought type projects like this. We need to fully involve them, find out what they want before we're going ahead with trying to do something like this. I don't think this is right. I've got no problem with traveller pictures. They need to be where they are, where they need to be somewhere on this site. But I don't think this is quite right, not this scheme. Something needs to be there, but not this scheme. It doesn't serve the right purpose. It doesn't provide for the community it's supposed to be for.
Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chair. Largely, I'm agreeing with Councillor Freeman here. I mean, it says the PPTS do not enclose a site with so much hard landscaping, high walls or fences that the impression may be given that the site and its occupants are deliberately isolated from the rest of the community. I mean, looks like we are deliberately isolating them, deliberately segregating them. And, you know, and as Councillor Freeman said, you know, nobody wants to think that they're not wanted in such a way. I don't know that, you know, seeing that site, if I was rolling up there, I wouldn't want to stay there, thinking, well, they don't want me here, do they? No, it's not exactly a welcoming place. If not here, where? Well, maybe further into the site, maybe further into the development, or at the very least, maybe with a different access, so that the people who hopefully will stay there will then at least feel welcomed. Thank you.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, that was very elegantly put, I have to say. But basically, yes, we failed. We failed on several accounts if we pass this. The CM5 policy, we will have failed the travellers, we will have failed the local community, there would not have been inclusion. We're segregating. Look at the fact that we can't get access for the traveller community to attend schools without having to drive along the A30. That seems completely, well, in our fashionable sustainability, completely thrown out the window. The outline master plan was there, it was indicated, it was discussed, it was probably partly what sold the planning application to go through. And the fact that we're actually now, where we have not seen the developer to come and justify it, we've not, we're beholden to them. And I have to say, if we have to take litigation or whatever or legal steps to stop them occupying, to actually get them to work with us, we will have failed as a borough if we don't actually grasp this problem and deal with it head on. Thank you.
Are there any more speakers before we go to the vote? Councillor Rattigan.
Sure, can I say? Thank you. Just to say, these are freehold. If nobody wants them, no one will buy them. And that is the reality of the world that we live in. I'm just making that point. It isn't going to be marketed to everybody, but it will be marketed to the Gypsy and Traveller community, and they will have the option to take up residence there if they see fit.
Thank you. There's nobody else wishing to speak. It's been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour of approval? Just two. And those against approval? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and put me down 8. That is not approved. We now need presumably a recommendation to refuse it. To an alternative recommendation. Councillor Tomlin.
Okay, I will propose a motion to refuse on the reasons that it does not comply with our policy CM5 is the main one. I think the other things will come out in there, but that's the main one. I think that would be the clauses within that would be defendable. Thank you.
And Councillor Tomlin, can I just clarify that's on the enclosure and isolation point of CN5 specifically that is a concern?
Yeah, the non-integration with the community, etc. And yeah, exactly.
Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll second this. I'm sure we can do better than this to serve our traveller community.
Been moved and seconded for refusal for the reasons given. Those in favour of refusal? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And those against refusal? 1 and 1 abstention. Thank you. That is refused. Bethan. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So that application is refused. And members, if I may, as normal practice, because it was a recommendation subject to a 106, the second reason for refusal would be the absence of a 106, which would be included within that part. All agreed.
Yeah. Everybody happy with that? Yeah. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Item 2, land at Breach Farmhouse, Egbury Road, St Marybourne. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for the erection of 3 detached dwellings at Breach Farmhouse, Egbury Road, St Marybourne. There is a brief update paper that provides details of the viewing, clarification that the additional red line area is biodiversity offsetting, and confirms an additional visualiser plan that will be shown momentarily that shows other approved dwellings in the vicinity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Greg. There are no speakers, so questions to officers? No, no questions to officers. In that case, debate. If there's no debate, Councillor McCormick.
Move recommendation then.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Freeman, thank you. Anybody wish to speak? No. Moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? I'll make that 9. And those against? And 1 abstention. Thank you. That is approved. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm that the application is approved in accordance with the agenda paper.
Item 3, Berry Court Farm, Bramley Road, Little London. And I have Mr Lasseter down as a speaker, but...
I think they're just changing it.
Yep, okay. We'll just wait whilst he comes up.
Thank you, Chairman. The application is a proposal for the variation of conditions for a previous approved B8 permission. The update paper includes a table that's within the agenda, but with an additional column confirming the amendments, which I'll quickly run through, the amendments to the conditions, that is. So if I could ask you to turn to the update paper and the summary of the recommendation. And I'll just run through that table to assist members with their assessment. So the first condition is a condition requiring compliance with the plans. That's duplicated as was. The second condition was previously, and I'll go by the original condition numbers whilst running through this. The second condition was a requirement for the development to be implemented in accordance with the 3 years from the original permission. The proposal has been implemented, so that condition is not now required. That therefore impacts the numbering. As I said, I'll stick with the original condition numbering. The third condition is the requirement for the 20-metre buffer. That proposal is from officers is not to change that condition, to require it as was. Fourth condition relates to the landscaping of that buffer, and that does have an amendment. It duplicates the condition as was, but changes the timing to require that detail is provided within 3 months of the decision. To not do so would otherwise be where we've got a variation of condition application that's already been commenced, to not add a requirement for time, providing some time for that to be complied with, would mean otherwise that we'd be granting planning permission with a condition that couldn't be complied with because it would already have been failed. So that would be an unsafe recommendation. So hence why you've got the 3 months in a number of these conditions. Number 5, as was, is the site plan. That's included again, details of the site layout plan included again, but modified to relate only to waste management. And the reason for that is because the proposal was originally speculative, and now it has development on it, and the waste management is the only requirement that is deemed to still be necessary. The 6th condition relates to the landscaping of boundaries. Again, that's duplicated, but with a change to 3-month requirement. External lighting condition is amended, and as there is no current external lighting on site, and that's changed to be prior to the installation of any lighting rather than prior to the commencement of development or within 3 months. The two contamination conditions, the contamination report and verification conditions, are both duplicated, but again, that 3-month timing allowance is included. The requirement for the use to remain as B8 and for the removal of permitted development, what was conditions 10 and 11, are reimposed as was, but with very limited change at the end to state unless unless approved in writing by the local planning authority on an application made for such. Condition 12, the use of the car park, is amended to provide flexibility so existing and proposed users can use the space. Condition 13 is amended and increased to allow storage up to 3 metres in height, noting that previously the proposal was speculative and there is now a current use of caravan storage that's deemed to be acceptable in that location, subject to conditions. The hours of use is proposed to be duplicated as was. Condition 15 relating to surface water drainage, again, is duplicated as was, but it's changed to include the 3-month timing, and the same for condition 16 around the habitat enhancement scheme, duplicated, but the timing changed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Greg. If we could have our speaker, Mr. Lasseter. Good evening, Mr. Lasseter. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, councillors. The application relates to a September 2019 approval in relation to the extension of a long-established business park. And it's made because I consider some of the conditions need amendment and others do not meet the statutory tests, primarily with regard to reasonableness, necessity and enforceability. So the application purports to recommend approval, but it is a refusal of the key requests. So if that is your decision, I'm sure my client will ask me to appeal. In my available 4 minutes, I only have time to address 3 of the 14 conditions, these being the most concern to my client. The first issue is the need for the 20-metre buffer. Regarding the requirement for such a large buffer, it should be noted that this is measured not from the trunk, but from the outer canopy of the overhanging trees. This would mean about 30 metres or 25% of the site could not be used for the permitted purpose. That is wholly unreasonable and fails to meet the statutory tests. The correct course of action would have been to refuse the application or to negotiate a reduction in the size of the application site. We agree that a buffer should be provided, but only with a depth of 8 metres and not 20 plus 10. Whereas your officers simply refer to non-statutory guidance that initially related primarily to major residential developments adjacent to woodlands, our case is based on a site-specific assessment by an experienced ecologist who visited the site to assess any potential ecological impacts, unlike your planning and biodiversity officers. Furthermore, my client's ecologist does not agree that Gypsy Lane contains species that are indicators of an ancient woodland, and we consider that the woodland strip is simply an overgrown hedgerow alongside an old drove route. The council's requirement for a buffer zone next to a hedgerow is 5 metres, and we're proposing 8. There was no suggestion when this application was made back in 2019 that the off-site trees constitute ancient woodland, nor that the trees were worthy of a TPO. And there's no evidence that the woodland strip has been harmed by the storage use that commenced soon after permission was granted. The relevant conditions relating to the buffer should be amended to refer to the 8-metre buffer. Turning to storage height, officers have agreed that the original limit of 2 metres was unreasonable, but the change to 3 metres is not acceptable and is considered not to pass the statutory tests. One of the existing tenants operates double-decker buses, which cannot be seen from outside the site, and there might be a demand to park such vehicles on the application site. On this application site. If there is a need to restrict height, a limit of 4.5 metres is suggested. Such a limit would enable a bus to park on site, but would not enable double stacking of containers, which was one of the officers' stated concerns.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. This condition should be amended to refer to the 4.5 metre height limit. Finally, hours of use. Again, I consider the restriction fails to pass the statutory tests in terms of necessity, reasonableness and enforceability. The existing business park is unrestricted in terms of hours of use, with some activities taking place outside the hours suggested in condition 13. I'm not aware of any adverse impact on the amenities of nearby properties in the 30+ years that the business park has been operational. Access is direct to Bramley Road and not close to any residential properties. Furthermore, it will be impossible to distinguish activity associated with the new site from activities taking place on the long-established business park, so enforcement of the condition would not be practicable. This condition should be deleted. I have concerns about other conditions, but there's not time to address them here, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Lassiter? No? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? No? In that case, debate. In no debate, Councillor Tomlin.
I'm sorry, Chair. I was going to propose the motion to follow the recommendation for approval with the conditions by the officer's report.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor McCormick. Thank you. Anybody wish to speak? Moved and seconded for approval in line with the officer's report. Those in favour? And those against? And one abstention. Councillor Hussey. Abstention. Thank you. Officer, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm that application, the conditions are varied in accordance with the officer recommendation in the main agenda paper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Greg. Right, item 4, land to the rear of 80 Pardown, Oakley. Bethan.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an outline application for the erection of one dwelling and associated works. Application was previously at committee and deferred for reviewing, and therefore the update paper provides details of the viewing panel held, provides officer clarification in terms of the heights of some of the surrounding properties as per the query at the viewing panel, provides some details of further representations from third parties, and also confirms that amended indicative plans have been provided that are shown on the visualiser for members' information, but that as this is an outline application with matters reserved, the indicative plans aren't for consideration, and it just shows one way that a scheme could come forward, hence why they're shared on the visualiser but not in the update, and haven't needed consultation with the public. The proposal is only to consider the principle of development and the access to the site. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Greg. There are no speakers because it's a deferral, so we'll start with questions to officers. Councillor Hussey. Could you put your microphone on, please?
Item 2, under reasons for approval, why this single development would have a significant effect. And it goes on to say, in combination with other developments. So, what are the other developments we're taking into consideration with this application?
The principle of one dwelling being cited on site.
Chairman, if I could just add to that, the second reason for approval relates to the impact of nutrients flowing into the Solent. So the likely significant effect in combination with other developments is all new housing development that flows into the Solent. It has been clarified by the European courts that is a significant material consideration, and that comes down to individual applications, and in this instance also the cumulative impact with all other developments that flow into the Solent.
Can you define significant to me in terms of an objective measurement rather than subjective comment?
Yes, in this case, significant is because of the level of nutrients coming out of any site, in this case nitrates, because it's a flow into the test and then into the solent. And because there's a nitrate impact, that can lead to eutrophication of the solent, which is a European designated site.
Not the question that I wanted answered. What is the impact of this single dwelling? You're saying significant. I want to know what significant means. Does it increase the risk 5%, 10%?
Any negative impact in terms of an increase in nitrates. It is in the report.
Yeah, so
Just getting the page for you now.
yeah, so it's on between pages 233 to 235, explains the additional load impact and how that tends to be offset through a packaged treatment plan and through the Eastleigh Borough Council mitigation scheme. We've had that reviewed by Natural England and they have confirmed that mitigation is suitable and that there's enough offset of land. Eastleigh have also confirmed that that's acceptable, so there is not going to be a harmful impact. Thank you.
I'm sorry to go on, I've just looked at that and it says Natural England further advises that there's an uncertainty as to whether new housing growth will further deteriorate.
That's giving an overview of how the issue came about. So if at the start we set the scene and then we explain the mitigation between pages 233 to 235, it's sort of telling the start to end process.
Anyone else for debate? Okay. Looking at this, it doesn't affect any strategic views. There are other backline developments literally in the next plot. And whilst there is definite harm to or disadvantage to the people who live in the two properties immediately in front of it, there is no major harm to the area that I can see in planning terms. I don't like it, but I can't see a reason to refuse it. So on that, for that reason, I move the officer recommendation. Would anybody like to second it? Councillor Court, thank you. Moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? And that is, I make that 9. And those against? And 1 abstention. Thank you. That is approved. Bethan.
Thank you, Chairman. That application is approved as per the reasons and conditions listed in the agenda. Thank you.
Item 5, Bramley Garage, Sherfield Road, Bramley. Bethan.
Thank you, Chair. This is a full planning application for the demolition of the existing garage and bakery buildings and redevelopment of the site to include a Class E use and 7 1- and 2-bedroom properties. Block A would be sited towards the front of the site, similarly positioned to the existing bakery, and would comprise of a 2.5-storey building with a Class E use on the ground floor and 5 flats above. Block B would comprise of a pair of semi-detached properties and would be located towards the rear of the site with private amenity space. Beyond that amenity space, for the semis, there is also a communal garden for the flatted development, which would be accessed from the public right-of-way running along the west of the site. The development would also include the change of use of a small strip of land associated with Springfields to be incorporated in the development. Other works include a communal seating area to the front of the site to serve the Class E use, a formal parking layout, new landscaping and servicing. In terms of an update, the agent has clarified that the section of the footpath which is located within the site is owned and managed by the applicant, and this will be widened and managed by any future management company. Condition 16, noise, has been amended to allow for demolition, site clearance and groundwork to take place. Condition 32, surface water, has also been amended to allow for demolition and site clearance to take place. There are also some additional objection letters relating to highways, parking, the footpath and the impact on the neighbours in Gibbs Meadow. These have been considered in the report and additional justification with page numbers of where they are on the in the agenda within the update paper. The application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions listed on pages 280 and 291 of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. And if we could have our first speaker, which is Councillor Bell. Good evening, Councillor Bell. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and it's the right-hand button on the microphone deck.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Chair and Councillors. I can only reiterate the comments that Bramley Parish has made concerning objecting to this application. These ad hoc developments are destroying Bramley as a village. It hasn't the infrastructure to support existing houses, never mind more. Already 343 plus 146 approved at Stocks Farm within or bordering the settlement policy boundary, plus houses down Cofford Lane against 200 at least in the local plan. The argument by the officer is that it is contributing to the housing stock of the borough and to the need of Bramley for smaller homes. Have you counted the smaller dwellings in the 489 bordering the settlement policy boundary? Bramley doesn't need them, but the borough does because, as stated, it does not have a 5-year land availability. The building block A is not 2.5 stories, it's more near 3, and is 2 metres at least higher than the surrounding buildings. The bakery is being lost and no guarantee that it will return into a smaller commercial area. Why 3 stories when it will stand out and impact on the street scene? Not according to the officer when the benefits outweigh this. What are the benefits to Bramley? Economic? Builders are short time on site, so short-lived. Bakery could be lost. The garage is going where? Infrastructure? School and surgery are running capacity without 140 recently approved. Sewage, according to the officer, foul drainage through the mains for these homes is not considered sufficient to increase the capacity to an unacceptable level. Tell that to the residents in North Row and St Irene Fields who have sewage overspill. The PC and Basingstoke and Dean have a written statement from Thames that says no further homes west of the pumping station until the upgrade to the infrastructure is made to the Sherfield treatment plant. Not finalised yet, but 16 to 20 months in the making, that being optimistic. Local amenities are easily available from this site. There is one stop at a dangerous position on the street, 100 metres from the railway crossing, closed for at least 40 minutes per hour. The parish football ground is considered by the officer to be public amenity space for flatted accommodation. This is private land. Access to the site is dangerous now and will not improve with this development and could be worse. There is a public right-of-way across the site, but this will not be any safer than at present. The parking is considered unacceptable whilst being 2 spaces short against the standard requirement because the site is near the railway, supposedly an alternative transport for these occupants. While this site could do with improvements to the building, etc., the building block A is too high. The number of homes being crammed into this space is too many, and block B will have an impact on the privacy of residents at Gibbs Meadow, being only 13 metres from their homes.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Infrastructure before housing. As is said by the officer, Basingstoke and Dean is benefiting from this development as it contributes to the housing stock, but there's no benefit to Bramley and its community. Parish Council stands by its original statement and fervently objects to this application. We cannot stand by and see Bramley being sacrificed for the sake of Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council not having a 5-year land availability. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Bell? No? Thank you very much. If we could have our next speaker, which is Ms. Jubb. Good evening to you. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and it's the right-hand button on the microphone deck. Good.
Thank you. The applicant for this planning application has owned and operated the garage and owns the whole site, and he's been there operating a local service for many years. Unfortunately, he is finding it increasingly difficult to operate his business without it causing significant disruption both to his operation and to the surrounding area. The site is no longer safe or sustainable for that business to operate, and an alternative solution for this site needs to be found. The proposal is the result of extensive positive discussions with the council. We thank the officers for their help with achieving a solution which we think will be very beneficial. It follows pre-application advice, public consultation, informal discussions with a number of local stakeholders. Just responding to some of the comments made by the parish council, we understand the need for infrastructure, but that falls outside what we can contribute towards. What we're seeking to do is provide a replacement commercial facility within a new building that will be purpose-built and fit for purpose, unlike the current buildings. The height of the buildings proposed at 2.5 stories have been significantly amended in their design to ensure that they do complement the street scene and will be an enhancement to the area. The bakery has the opportunity to relocate back onto the site, but at some point something needs to be done on this site. The buildings are on the verge of collapse. There's no other solution other than to look to a complete redevelopment, and we will do what we can to accommodate the bakery, but ultimately that's outside our control. The drainage on the site will be improved for the site itself. We can't be held responsible for other things that are happening within the village that are longer-term strategic issues. And it is absolutely obvious that highway safety and pedestrian safety will be improved by the proposals. The bakery is a tenant on the site, and provision is made for them to move back on, as I've stated. The scheme offers significant benefits to the street scene, traffic movements, pedestrian safety, and biodiversity of the site. So there's a lot to be said for what it will do to enhance the area. And the residential development has been carefully designed to ensure that it respects the amenity of neighbouring residents and meets all of the required standards and is a good quality design. We thank the officers for their recommendation. We invite the committee to approve the application and allow a long-term solution for the future of this site to be achieved and delivered. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the speaker? Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mr. Jupp. You mentioned highway safety will be improved as a result of this application. How so?
There's two main things to consider with this site. The first is that at the moment the access point is very wide, relatively uncontrolled, and the proposal will be to narrow it and have a much clearer defined two-way in and out, which will mean that there's less scope for cars going in different directions and unpredictable movements. The second thing to consider is the public right-of-way that runs along the side of the site. At the moment, that public right-of-way, which is used intensively by locals, particularly with young children going to and from schools, whilst the part of the site of the footpath is contained within fencing, when you get into the frontage car parking, at the moment you've got cars parked and manoeuvring in conflict with that public right-of-way. And the proposals result in a much more clearly laid out formal parking arrangement with a segregated route for the public right-of-way so that there's no conflict between pedestrians and cars. So on those two grounds, I think that there will be a significant improvement both in amenity and safety.
So just another question. Well, so just detailing in that segregation between the public using the footpath or the pedestrians using the public footpath and the traffic, are you putting physical barriers in so that that will actually be maintained?
What we're proposing is rather than having any kind of solid boundary, it will be delineated on the ground and by bollards running to segregate them, to try and keep it visually open but very clearly defined so that there's two distinct uses.
So okay, thank you. Just to clarify, you said bollards. Do you mean what sort of pitching and posts?
Yeah,
Concrete, wood?
Whatever is desired. We haven't gone into that detail yet.
Right, okay.
Any more questions, Councillor Freeman?
Just a quick one, and just to clarify, you are intending to provide a space for the bakery on this site if they want it?
The ground floor of the front building is a dedicated commercial floor space, which would be available to the bakery if they so wish to move back in. Ultimately, we can't dictate who will actually build it out and who might want to move back in, but the opportunity is there, and we've made every effort we can to facilitate the opportunity and lay that floor space out in a way that it would suit what the bakery might be looking for.
Are there any more questions? Go on, Councillor Tomlin, if there are no others.
Thank you, Chair, for indulging. You mentioned the maintenance of the footpath is owned by the applicant. It would be managed by a management company. So, am I right? Therefore, the residents would be paying for the maintenance, effectively. Yeah.
Yes, in the long term, once the site's redeveloped, I would envisage that for this type of development, there would be a joint responsibility between all of the owners, commercial and residential, to contribute towards whatever maintenance is required of all the communal areas, the parking, the landscaping, and the footpath would be part of that. It's included within the ownership of the site, and therefore provision would have to be made for maintenance in the deeds of those properties in the long run, because I don't think there's anybody else that could be responsible for it. The council aren't going to adopt that land. Therefore, provision would have to be made, as it is in most new developments these days, for whatever maintenance is required has to be accommodated.
I've got a question. You said that the current owner of the garage is finding it difficult to operate there. Could you tell us in what way he's finding it difficult to operate?
So ultimately, this is a car servicing and MOT garage. You've got the well-known issue about the closing barriers on the level crossing. That has an impact on customers trying to get to the site when they've got appointments for MOTs, etc. So, sometimes they'll find themselves the wrong side of the barrier and they can't physically get their car there in the time that they wanted. Then also there's the issue of conflict with cars trying to get in and out of the actual access onto the site when you've got cars parked waiting for the level crossing. The other consideration is that there are very strict rules about how you actually operate running MOT tests, and part of the MOT test is about taking the car out on a test drive, and you have to do it within a certain time to meet the requirements, and they're finding it very difficult to actually meet the very strict standards that they have to be able to do MOTs because they can't get in and out quickly. So it's all things like that. You've also then got the customers and deliveries for the bakery trying to operate alongside all of the cars coming and going, and they're constantly shifting cars around, and it's just very awkward for both businesses to operate whilst also having pedestrians coming and going through the public right-of-way as they are entitled to do. So it's that combination of all those different things that is just making a recipe for disaster at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any more questions? No, thank you. Questions to officers? I'll start with one since there are no hands up. The entrance is being reduced in width. Could you tell us how wide that entrance will be once it's been, if this work goes ahead?
Yes, hold on. I'll just measure that for you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Tomlin.
The applicant was saying about the segregation of the footpath and the road with, well, we got the word bollards or posts. So that can be conditioned, made a condition, I assume?
Yes, so we have condition 26 that already requires the details of the boundary treatments that are going to be proposed as part of the development, but certainly if that's something that members want to specify, we could add to that condition 26 to include a requirement for bollards separating out the car park and the footpath, and then change or add to the reason for that condition to include for safety reasons for users of the car park and footpath in accordance with policy CN9.
Just on that, so could we take advice from the officers about how we would be able to make it such that pedestrians don't wander into the cars as opposed to bollards stopping cars wandering into the pedestrians? Is there a, do you see what I mean? The bollards, the pedestrians could avoid and they could go into the car path of a car, whereas we don't want chain wire fencing, but is there some other devices that are common practice and known about that you could recommend?
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. I don't think there's anything more specific we can recommend. I suppose the point would be that it's already considered, I suppose, an improvement. This would be a further improvement of the existing situation, taking into account the concern raised about the way that the layout would work going forward. I think the fact that there would be a vertical separation would be enough to alert users of the footpath of that change, as opposed to there needing to be a physical separation as such.
So it's about it's just under 6.5 metres, about 6.4 in width. Thanks.
Any more questions for officers? Councillor Tomlin.
Well, there is one, and that is in the report, the comment about the number of houses, the number of dwellings, therefore the inhabitants, doesn't constitute an overload of the sewage system, given the recommendations that we've had from Thames Water. Can you justify that comment, i.e. Thames Water have said nothing, no development until such time as they've done their works? And we've had that through the planning inquiry for Stocks Farm.
I think the difference with this site is it's an existing site, so it's already in use, so it's already been built upon, so it's already being used. We felt that in this instance that conditions weren't necessary, given the existing use of the site, and no comments from Thames Water, even though they were consulted. So.
Okay, if there are no more questions, debate. Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, at the site visit, I would like to actually thank Councillor Rattigan for buying the iced buns, because it was a very long morning, that one, and that was most welcome. The thing that struck me about that site was it was a bit like stepping back into the 1940s, although I hasten to add I wasn't around in the 1940s. Well, only a little bit. And it struck me that given today's health and safety, Factory Offices, Premises Act, etc., that site was well beyond its use-by date, shall we say. So I think this proposal for redevelopment, I think, is most welcome, and therefore I would support it.
Councillor Tomlin.
I was going to support the building of this site, but with some conditions. So I'd like to put those conditions and see how we go. And that is that obviously we nail down the segregation, as we just discussed, of the footpath to make it safe. I'd like to see that we could, with the Class E usage, remove, is it subsection G, which is light industrial. This should be a commercial retail units, and E is a very wide class. Am I correct in its subset G, just to make sure it doesn't get turned into something other than a shop, local community facility?
Thanks, Councillor Tomlin. Just to confirm that we've already advised that we would be able to include the details of the treatment to separate the car park and the footpath, should members wish to add that. In respect of the type of use here, yes, that's a condition that could also be imposed, requiring that the facility, the commercial element, remains a retail use. I think that's the element that you're suggesting. Obviously up to members in terms of how far they wish to go, if it's just the light industrial part that you wish to remove, or whether it's the retail use that you seek to secure. Obviously we'll need to understand the reasoning for that as well.
Right, thank you. Well, yeah, the reasoning was to encourage it to be a bakery or a retail shop premises, rather than a gym or something of that nature, just so that it is a wider community benefit. Then the other condition is I want to put to members that we do something about the timing of this sewage, because it is an issue in Bramley. By the time this all gets worked on, I think Thames Water, they're talking 2 years' time, but we have some form of condition that sees that this joins in with the development, a sort of moratorium, if you like, that Thames Water have suggested, because I think it's very important. And this site currently, it may have mechanics, but I don't think they spend much of their time in the toilet or showering or whatever. And neither does anybody in the bakery, because I don't believe they have a, if they do have it, well, they must have a toilet, but I don't think it's heavily used. So I think this will be an additional thing, and it is something we should consider. And the very last one is, during construction, the design and the management plan for the construction, we need to see that all vehicles are accommodated within the site. There is no parking in the immediate area for builders' vehicles or vans and such like. It would be a big problem that we should need to make that maintained on site. So it's those 4 conditions then that I'm asking Councillor Faulkner to consider, and I'd be happy to second on that basis. Thank you.
Chair, I think there's quite a few things to come back on there. So if I could just expand on the Class E suggestion. And I think that the suggestion was that you would restrict light industrial. So I'll just run through a very brief summary of the different parts of Class E. So Part A of Class E, it allows for retail sales other than for hot food. Part B is sale of food and drink for consumption on the premises. Part C is financial and professional services. D, indoor sport, recreational fitness. E, provision of medical or health services. F, creche and nurseries. And then G is those light industrial uses and offices, etc. So it's just trying to understand which particular uses and the reason for that. I think from what you're saying is it's that you're seeking to ensure that it remains a kind of a traditional shop, the retail sale of goods. I believe that's what you were angling at, rather than removing just the industrial element. That actually it's to ensure that there is a retail offering for the residents of Bramley, where retail goods, whatever they may be, can be bought and sold, and so there's a vitality and a vibrancy and facility there. So that would be the EA part. In respect of the drainage requirement, the site already has a drainage connection. It's not a development on a greenfield site like others. The applicant wouldn't need any more planning permission to connect to the existing drainage connection. And in any event, Thames Water has a requirement through their own legislation outside of planning to accept any waste into their system. If that means that they have to come and tanker away waste if it were overloaded, then that would be what they would have to do. But here is an existing connection. There's not a requirement for another connection. And it's in respect to the construction management plan, there is a construction management plan condition already that requires details of parking and construction vehicles to be accommodated on site. But obviously what we can't do is if a tradesperson chooses to park their vehicle not on site, we can't force against that because people can park on the highway without any planning controls. We can require them to provide suitable space to ensure that everybody can be accommodated on site. You can lead the horse to water, but you can't make them drink, obviously. So yeah, we've got a construction management plan condition that requires suitable provision on site for parking of construction vehicles. I think that was picking up on everything. Thank you, Chair.
Well, I suppose, yes, I agree with, apart from the sewage side, it is extra housing there. There's no private dwellings on this site, and we're talking about a number of residential dwellings. Therefore, we are putting an additional load into the sewer, and we have this condition with the Stocks Farm, where the inspector agreed with Thames Water, and limited occupation until such time, or tankering if they provided tanks on site. So it's a condition to allow that to happen that I was requesting. Thank you.
Difference there, Chair, sorry, and one wants to come in, is that is a greenfield site with no connections. This is a site with an existing connection. And I don't know if you're adding to that.
I was just going to comment on the procedures. So obviously the officers agree with the first two conditions you suggested, the footpath and the changes so it becomes retail only under the permitted development rights. They've also clarified that the construction management plan is already covered. So those two conditions will become part of the officer's recommendation. If you wish to persist with the third condition that the officers aren't supporting, then we need to have a vote on whether or not that condition should be added to the recommendation. So you can propose that yourself and see if there's a seconder, and then we'll vote on that condition, or you can withdraw it based on the officer's advice.
Thank you for the clarification. There was the bollards and segregation, which I think the officers had agreed. Yeah. All right. Well, okay. I will propose then that we put a condition of occupancy on the houses until Thames Water has provided its timing and plans for delivery of the sewage solution for the west side houses of Bramley from the pump station. I think the detail was.
Thank you for the proposal. I will second that happily. Please do.
Sorry, Chair, it's just in relation to that, not wishing to labour the point, but in terms of the reasonableness of that condition, it simply wouldn't stand the test of reasonableness, I'm afraid. It's your decision, Councillor, as to whether to put it forward in the motion, but I can only give you that advice that it wouldn't meet those requirements of reasonableness given the existing connection and the fact that, in effect, it would be then requiring something in control of a third party.
Okay. The additional condition has been moved and seconded. Would anybody like to speak on it? Councillor Bowes.
Just slightly concerned on the retail bit, that make sure that we don't inadvertently exclude hot food and basically what it is at the moment, a cafe. So that would be A and B, I believe.
Can we vote on this condition and then we'll come back to that? So the condition in terms of the requirement not to build it until the sewage situation has been sorted, or not to occupy it until the sewage situation has been sorted because of the increased volume of sewage it is likely to generate. That's been moved and seconded. Those in favour of including that condition? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll make that 7. And those against? 1, 2, and 1 abstention. Yeah, thank you. So that condition is to be included. And now if we could address Councillor Bowes' point about the bakery and the hot food situation regarding Class E.
Thank you, Chair. So on that point, the different classes of Class E, so if the intention was that it would allow for retail and sale of food and drink for consumption on open premises, that means it would be restricted to Class E, A and B only.
Okay. Councillor Faulkner, you said you were supportive of it. Were you moving the motion?
Yes, Chair, I'll move the motion to accept the...
Thank you. And I assume the seconder is Councillor Tomlin. Thank you. Moved and seconded for approval with the conditions the officers have imposed and the additional conditions regarding the footpath and the additional condition regarding the sewage. Those in favour of approval? That's everybody. Thank you. That is approved. Officer Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. To confirm that application is approved in accordance with the officer recommendation, but with an additional element to condition 26 to include details of the boundary treatment separating the car park and footpath, with an additional condition regarding no occupation until drainage upgrades in the Bramley ward, and in respect of restricting the use class of the commercial premises to Class EA and EB. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Greg. It's 8 o'clock, 5-minute break. Thank you.
The surgery one's a little less restrictive than what they've just required.
Right, thank you, everybody. Thank you. Item 6, 52 Reading Road, Chinham. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for the erection of a single-storey granny annex for ancillary use to the main dwelling at 52 Reading Road, Chinham. There is no update. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If we could have our speakers, please. That's Mr. and Mrs. Alayawala. Good evening to you. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and it's the right-hand button on the deck in front of you.
Good day, members of the Development Committee. My name is Stephen, and I am the applicant for the planning application in front of you, which proposes the erection of a timber single-storey granny annex for my elderly mother. The structure will be of ancillary use to the main dwelling. The main dwelling is a small 2-bedroom house where myself, my wife, and 2 young kids reside. My mother lives alone in London and has some physical and health challenge. I am the main family contact with others living further afield. So this leaves her coping without family support. So as she gets older, it's quite a worry for us that when she gets very unwell, we might not be able to reach her very quickly. And also expected that in the near future, she will become even more dependent on myself, my family rather. So we feel that this annex will be the ideal solution as we have the space to accommodate her and a dedicated carer assets when needed. I believe this proposal will be a valuable addition to the local community and will provide much needed accommodation for elderly relatives who require additional care and support. The granny annex will be built to a high standard of quality and safety using sustainable materials wherever possible. And it will be designed to be energy efficient and eco-friendly. I understand that some concerns have been raised about parking as an impact of this development. I can assure you that this will not be the case. 2 applications were submitted for this same development. One was a permitted development application, which has already been approved, while the other is a household application, which is a planning permission, which is what we're discussing right now. I think it's been suggested in the objection comment that these 2 applications pertain to 2 different structures. But it is very important to also clarify that these 2 applications are actually for the same building that we're proposing. And finally, I would like to respectfully ask that the committee agree with the case officer's recommendation and approve the application, which I believe falls well within the National Planning Policy Framework and Basingstoke then local plan and guidance. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. If you could send thank you. Questions for Mr. Alayawala? No? Thank you very much. You could return to your seat. Thank you. Questions to officers? Councillor Hussey.
Can the officers tell me what the distance is between the main building and the party line to the west?
It's 1.5 metres to the boundary.
Any other questions? Okay. I've got one on the planning history. Application for certificate of lawfulness for the siting of a mobile home. That's granted last year. Has that ever been actually implemented?
No, it hasn't been implemented. This proposal is an alternative to that. So that proposal for the certificate of lawful proposed use was on the basis that the proposal would be for a mobile home to be sited on the land, whereas this is a prefabricated structure. So mobile home would sit on the land and therefore not be development on its own right, whereas this is a more permanent structure to be constructed on land. Just to pick up on Councillor Hussey's point, it's between 1.5 metres, 1.6 metres the whole way round the building.
Not wide enough for vehicle access.
No.
Okay. Any more questions for officers? Debate? Or no debate, I don't really. Councillor McCormick, thank you.
I'm going to move recommendation, Chair.
Thank you. You've beaten me to it, so I'm happy to second it. 'Cause I don't see the difference between a mobile home and a prefab. It seems to say moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? And that's everybody. Thank you. Greg.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm the application is approved in accordance with the main addenda. Thank you.
Right. Number 7, Long Acres, New Road, Little London. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for the erection of a single-storey dwelling at Long Acres, New Road. There is an update paper, provides details of viewing panel held at the site, confirms the retained biodiversity position, confirms the tilted balance doesn't apply where there's a clear reason for refusal related to heritage, and confirms that the ownership isn't the same as Berry Court Farmhouse. If I could just remind members as well, as set out within the agenda, there has been a previous appeal at the site, which was dismissed, including for reasons that officers are now proposing on heritage and biodiversity grounds. In respect of heritage, in terms of the setting, with reference to Historic England guidance, there's a quote provided page 335 of the Historic England guidance. And how that harm manifests is set out at page 336 of the report. And in respect of the biodiversity impact, that's summarised well in the second quote on page 339 from the planning inspector. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Could I have our first speaker, which is Mr. Sterry. Good evening, Mr. Sterry. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good evening. Objections to this application centre on issues of historic conservation and biodiversity. And it's worth remembering that when it comes to overall environmental heritage, history and natural history are inextricably linked. To set the scene, the proposed development lies in Pamba, a rural parish with exceptional biodiversity. In statutory terms, it's the most important one for wildlife in the borough. Roughly 25% of parish land has Site of Special Scientific Interest status, SSSI for short, and it accounts for roughly 37% of land with SSSI designation, for which Basingstoke and Deane is a local planning authority. It also hosts 7 designated sites of importance for nature conservation, or SINCs for short. Designated sites do not exist in ecological isolation and are merely representative indicators of wildlife-rich areas. The case has already been made for a 20-metre buffer zone between the proposed development and the river to the south. Here I'd like to concentrate on a tree belt that lies to the north. The footprint of the proposed development immediately abuts its boundary. Your supplementary planning document, Landscape, Biodiversity and Trees, states a minimum buffer of 20 metres should be provided between the edge of the woodland/tree belt and the development. Ignoring this requirement was cited as a reason for recommending refusal by your biodiversity officer. If you overlay the 20-metre buffer zones for the tree belt and river zone, they overlap and demonstrate there's no room for development on this land. Returning to the tree belt, ancestry and neighbouring biodiversity records elevate the significance of this particular example above and beyond the ordinary. 50 metres to the west, a tree-lined byway that's Gypsy Lane as referred to in a previous application, is now proposed for designation as the borough's latest site of importance for nature conservation. That's by Hampshire Biodiversity Information Centre. In addition, the garden of nearby West Witt Cottage has also been proposed for the same designation. The primary role of SINC designation is to ensure that noteworthy biodiversity is given due consideration in the planning process. These new SINC sites in the making and the tree belt share the same ancestry and have biodiversity in common. Environmental buffer zones exist for good reason, not just to protect roots and water uptake by trees, but also to safeguard biodiversity associated with beleaguered habitat. The presence in the vicinity of a minimum of 6 species of bats reinforces the importance of buffer zones, especially since their numbers include western barberstole, which is one of Britain's rarest mammals. Like all bats, barberstalls use tree belt margins for feeding. They catch flying insects, and they roost and mothers give birth in crevices and tree holes, just the sort of niches provided by ancient tree belts.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Development right next to this tree belt would harm the survival chances of bats, as well as other wildlife, of course. As a council, you rightly acknowledge the importance of biodiversity, the restoration of damaged habitats, and the concept of rewilding as a moral imperative on behalf of current residents and to secure a natural legacy for future generations. These worthy aspirations are just empty rhetoric if, alongside, the council permits de-wilding, habitat degradation and biodiversity loss through the piecemeal development of environmentally sensitive open countryside. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Sterry? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Turn the microphone off, please. Thank you. No, still on. Right, that's it. Thank you. If we could have Mr. Cottrell and Mr. Kingston, please. Just Mr. Cottrell. Good evening, Mr. Cottrell. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good evening, Chair. As you've just heard, obviously this is currently recommended for refusal, but really it does actually boil down to 2 items. Taking the first in the buffers, as you've just been told there, the northern tree line isn't an ancient woodland. It's got no protection on it in any way, shape or form, and it's actually not a reason that is cited for in the refusals, which is backed up by the inspector and also by the officers and is within the update paper. So really it's the concern over, is there enough of a buffer for the Bow Brook at the bottom? Now, we've provided 19.5 metres. Which does reduce to 13.5, admittedly, in terms of the design of my building that I've provided. There's a little kink, and that takes us down to 13.5 metres. The area between the edge of the site boundary and the stream is going to be retained as the paddock as it is right now, which obviously will allow the horses to continue to graze on that land. The appeal site that was being referred to had parking and garden space in that area. Well, that's all been removed from there and moved to the northern side of the site. The PEAs and the net gain reports showed 12% net gain, and they all provided information to show that the buffers are acceptable in terms of what we have provided for Bow Brook. In terms of the inspector's comments that were made on the previous one, it basically referred to the fact that they wanted a more appropriately sized buffer, which is precisely what is now proposed with this actual application now. In recent comments as well that were provided by the biodiversity officer, which haven't actually been included in the main agenda report, the officer has stated that the species and habitats and issues and constraints that were related within those PEA reports can be mitigated through actions that we have suggested, and that suitable conditions can be put in place to make sure those things happen. This clearly shows that that in terms of the biodiversity value on that site, it will be protected, and that these buffers, to me, are now more than suitable. Couple this with the additional planting, and the links for the wildlife will be enhanced. Turning to the concerns with regards to the heritage side of things. This is something obviously that we've discussed many times here with various different outcomes. The officer's report doesn't tell you that a rebuttal was submitted to the HET comments. Then the HET team have actually confirmed that the identified harm to the heritage asset is at the lower level of the sliding scale in the less than substantial harm category. That, for me, in simple terms, is it's one notch up from no harm. Those of you that were on the viewing panel the other week will have seen the chimney and the corner of the listed building from the point where you were dropped off. I say the chimney and the corner because that was all you can actually see because of the large trees.
You have 1 minute remaining.
The design of the dwelling has been reduced in terms of its overall scale. It's now a 2-bedroom bungalow, which obviously, as you all know, there is a requirement for bungalows. Talking of, in terms of the overall distances, in terms of separation with regards to the setting of this listed building, we're over 50 metres away from what is Berry Court Farm, the listed asset. You may remember one of my applications on the main road where we were 7 metres away and that bungalow was approved and is currently being built. There was only a 6-foot fence that provided separation. So compare that to what we have here. Is the harm sufficient to warrant a refusal? Talking of tilted balance, in my opinion, tilted balance should have been applied, but hey, we'll get to that. Dare I mention the whole 5-year land supply? Taking that out of the equation right now, back to bungalows, there is a requirement for 2-bedroom bungalows, and I think that should have been afforded a much higher weight when we talk about the tilted balance. Therefore, to conclude, this application has been reduced in scale with a much larger buffer being provided. The harm to that buffer, in our opinion, is minimal, and it's at the lower end of the less than substantial harm. And I would therefore ask you to please approve this application and allow a family back to their home village and self-build this dwelling. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Cotterill? No? Thank you very much. Councillor Slimming. Good evening, Councillor Slimming. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. You know very well that I come to speak to you only when I feel that maybe you ought to make this decision. And that was why I brought it in to committee. Earlier this year, I was advised that the applicant had been waiting several weeks for the heritage team to respond to the application. And I felt that at that point, it ought to be brought to you to make a decision. The officers at the time, I understood, had only that as an objection. Obviously, subsequently, there have been more objections raised. I also requested that you had a site visit, because considering you've already considered this twice, before my time, should I add, nobody, as far as I'm aware, as a councillor, certainly not from the committee point of view, has visited the site and seen for themselves how the setting was in relationship to the brook, to the listed building, and also to the other properties in the area. When you came to visit the site, you came a little later on in the year, but when I was there in January, there were obviously the least number of leaves and other greenery available, and therefore it was quite obvious that you could not see the listed building apart from the chimney from where the site of the development's going to be. I'm a farmer's daughter, and I know all about animals because I used to look after a lot of them. This field will remain very much an agricultural field. It will remain for her horses, and horses, of course, are known to dig up ground with their hooves, and therefore I don't see that it's going to be any different in the setting than it is at the moment. I believe that people should be able to offer an opportunity to put a different point of view, and I understand that this is quite a controversial application, and I did actually read all the application comments. People are allowed to have a differing view, and I felt that it was right that you came and saw for yourself what the application was all about, and I'm very pleased that many of you did come to the site. I certainly think that the applicant themselves have bent over backwards to address all the issues that were raised on the previous applications that were refused. I am not an advocate of building on greenfield sites personally, and I neither am I an advocate of allowing biodiversity to be trashed. I used to work for the Environment Agency, God's sake. However, I do not believe that this is a significant harm And I do believe that this application hopefully will be supported. Thank you.
Questions for Councillor Slimming? No? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? Okay. Debate. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Slimming for allowing us to go on site. The reasons for refusal, as I see them, are, we'll just deal with the easy one first, if I may. The reason for refusal 2 is the impact on the Berrycourt farm. Frankly, we are at the tiny end of seeing that. We could barely see it, and having or knowing how many applications we've approved much closer to that grade 2 listed building, I have to say a modest home, in my view, would cause even less damage than we've already done to that. In my view, the application in front of us took on board what had been refused previously from the site. I was lucky enough to look up the building line from the field, and I could see another property on that building line. The biodiversity is important, but would it be impacted at 19 metres or 13 metres? I don't believe it would. And I have to say that the river course is much more affected further down where development is more substantial. I believe that we have a need for bungalows, and we have to be mindful that when they come in front of us, we need to give them a little bit more weight than we do within this officer's report. Genuinely, I think there is a siting that works, height and impact that works, the bulk works, and the trees that abut the property onto the road are not of valuable. I went moving back to the bus. I didn't believe that those trees were either ancient or valuable. My view is that they could be replaced if one of them was to be impacted by the development. And therefore, frankly, I think I agree with Councillor Slimming, not something I often do, but that I would like to move this to be approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Move for approval. Anybody like to second that? Councillor McCormick. You're seconding it?
Yeah, I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody wish to speak? No? No hands up? Yep, I'll just bring Mike in. Sorry, didn't see you. Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there's one thing I'm perhaps not slightly clear on. Much is made of the listed building, but it seemed to me to be right next to it was the back of an industrial estate, a small industrial estate. And therefore that sort of seemed to negate some of the sort of arguments on nature, biodiversity, etc., because the entrance to that apparently was from the other side, so we couldn't see it, but you could clearly see it was there. So I had some concerns about its proximity to the watercourse, but then that industrial estate is already, shall we say, also an impact. So I suppose I was coming down because of that more in favour of it than I otherwise would have been.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if I could just come back on a couple of points. The first is in respect of the impact to the setting of the listed building. That is a statutory consideration. And whilst there may be a scale of less than substantial harm or substantial harm, as soon as there is any harm, such a impact must be given a significant weight in the decision-making process. And if it provides clear reason for refusal, it takes us away from the tilted balance, which the update paper does confirm. So just bringing to members' attention the statutory control and the fact that as soon as there is any harm, which it is officers' view that there is, and there is a clear explanation of why that is in the report. Intervisibility in itself isn't necessary to demonstrate that harm. It's an experience of the setting of the building itself. And in that respect, the planning inspectorate also found that there was harm to the setting of the listed building, albeit from a different proposal in terms of height. But the impact of the now proposed development is similar in terms of the impact on the setting of the listed building and the biodiversity from the previous application, and hence our recommendations for refusal on those grounds. In respect of the need for bungalows and the weight that members wish to put to that, and it being a public benefit that they may wish to put additional weight to, that particular position is understood. Thank you, Chairman.
And Chair, just in terms of Councillor Faulkner's sort of query around the commercial uses behind Berry Court Farm, I suppose ultimately that was the same. That's still the same position as considered by the inspector. So nothing's changed in that sense. That was already there in that previous appeal decision as well.
Councillor Rattigan, you've moved for approval. Sorry, yep, seconded. Could you give us your reasons?
Yep.
Thank you. Moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour of approval? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And those against? 3. That is approved. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm that that is approved, that will need to be delegated to officers to agree pre-commencement conditions with the applicant, which I would suggest should include complying with the approved plans, development occurring within 3 years, materials being agreed, boundary treatments being agreed, hard and soft landscaping being agreed, compliance with the ecology report, any lighting details prior to installation, non-migratory surface for the access, provision of parking, cycle parking and bin storage, arboricultural fencing being installed and complying with the submitted report, flood risk mitigation measures, utility services details, construction and delivery hours, the removal of permitted development, and a requirement for water efficiency to 110 litres a day. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Greg. Number 8, Pirates Cottage, Tubbs Lane, Highclere. Bethan.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for variation of condition 1 relating to plans and conditions 3 relating to materials at Pirates Cottage, Tubbs Lane in Highclere in relation to the extant permission 21/03763/ROC to materially alter the appearance of the proposed new dwelling in relation to materials. The materials will be brick and slate, whereby the use of bricks was established under the original technical details consent approval, which is reference 20/01664/TDC. No external dimensions of the dwelling or its siting have altered since the previous variation of condition. This is just to consider really the change of materials. The application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions listed at the end of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethan. There are no speakers, so questions to officers? No? Debate? In that case, I will move the officer recommendation, seconded by Councillor McCormick. Moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? And that I make 9, and those against, and 1 abstention. Thank you. Right, that's Bethan.
Thank you, Chair. That application is approved as per the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 9, land adjoining Cliff Surgery, Minchins Lane, Bramley. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for the formation of a highway access, the erection of three three-bedroom and 1 4-bedroom house with associated works. There is no update on the application, but if I could just remind members, there has been appeal history at the site where an identical scheme was dismissed at appeal, but it was only dismissed at appeal by virtue of the lack of completion of the legal agreement to provide financial contributions for off-site creation and maintenance of biodiversity habitat, and the securing of that is in front of you as part of the recommendation for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Greg. If we could have our first speaker, Councillor Flukes. Good evening, Councillor Flukes. You have 4 minutes, and I will remind you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Yeah, thanks for that. Good evening. My name is Chris Flukes. I'm the chair of the Bramley Parish Council Planning Committee. Firstly, I'd like to remind you that this is an entirely new application. There is no permission in principle on this site as it stands. The previous appeal on the site was dismissed with the inspector stating, "I cannot be satisfied that appropriate arrangements would be made to secure adequate infrastructure to mitigate the biodiversity impacts of the proposal." As part of this application, there is a Section 106 document which purports to correct this. I point out that this would be unenforceable as Bow Brook does not flow between Bramley Lane and Strawberry Fields. The inspector was happy with the highway impact, but it should be noted that the visit was in September 22, when the traffic and use of the surgery was still below COVID levels. Now you regularly find cars parked on both sides of the road outside the surgery. Even Hampshire highways appear to have some misgivings. And as the borough has declared a climate emergency, I would expect more than lip service to the eco-credential of the dwellings. No mention of solar panels, heat pumps or proper rainwater harvesting, just vague mention of water butts. And now to our famous sewage problem. Thames Water are still working on their designs, which hinges on extra pumped capacity from the number 1 sewage pumping station towards Sherfield. This is not so much as kicking the can down the road, more like shoveling the sewage to Sherfield. A quick search showed that in 2020, 34 spills totaling 393 hours, that's more than an hour a day, and in 2021 to 2022, 26 spills totaling 309 hours. Is this how we want to treat the River Loddon? And the sewage map on the Rivers Trust website is damning for our locality. In conclusion, I would ask you to refuse this application, as it appears to be more about maximum profit than the mythical unicorn of 5-year land supply. Thank you.
Questions for Councillor Flukes? No? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? No? I have one, and that's regarding the appeal. We, as a council, as a committee, we won the appeal, but on a technicality rather than a substantial amount. What was the situation on costs?
In respect of costs, we were awarded, or we were against us, the applicant was awarded partial award of costs on highways grounds, Chair.
Thank you. So we won the appeal, but we lost on the costs because our reason for refusal was not substantiated by the inspector. Is that?
Yes.
That's the correct understanding of it.
Yes, we won the appeal by virtue of the fact that the legal agreement to secure off-site biodiversity enhancements wasn't completed. And that was the sole reason for the inspector dismissing the appeal.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Are there any more questions? In that case, debate. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this is, as it says, it's a new application. So on such a thing, one has to look at it. And I would argue that looking at the provided drawings, we are missing, well, certainly in our package, a street scene. We've got elevations, and when you actually look at the site plan and the description, these are linked detached houses. And on page 379, we have the report from our landscape officer who says that these are the, well, you can read it, but the summary is that they're urbanised housing on the edge of the countryside. And when you actually visit the site, Minson's Lane on the left-hand side as you're going north, on the side that this development would be potentially, you've got old heritage farmhouses, you've got barns, you've got the doctor's surgery, which is an imitation of a barn, and then you come to these urban houses and then the open countryside. So I would want to agree with our landscape officer's comments, as he still maintains, and say that actually this is an overdevelopment of this site. I'm not saying that we've got the principle of development with a PIP. It's a separate application, I appreciate that, but I realise where we are with development on this site. But I would argue that this is too dense for its blending in with the countryside, and so would be contrary to basically the reasons for approval number 2. Would be the reverse, that it has significant impacts on the landscape because of its density. So on that basis, I would move refusal, but I would also reserve the right that if we lose that we talk about the sewage condition that we had on the previous application of the bakery, because this is exactly the same situation. So I will move it for refusal on the reversal of approval number 2.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm to members that the planning history of the site is a very significant material consideration. If members were to seek to refuse the application on the impact to the character and appearance of the area, or on something that the planning inspector has previously found would have an acceptable impact on the character and appearance of the area, we would lose and we would have costs awarded against us. I don't think I can labour that point any more strongly. In respect of the condition on drainage, there is already a condition on this site, condition 22, in respect of drainage. It's a greenfield site without any connection to drainage at the moment, so there needs to be a condition, and there is.
So I may come back on that, Chair. Planning inspectors seem to have different views of the same subject on many occasions. So, I mean, this would, it's wise. We have in front of us a new application. We have to, and we are we are obliged to consider this as a new application, because the applicant wouldn't have put it in if he didn't want a new application. He would have done gone back in with the officers with the changes that were necessary on that biodiversity agreement and with the with the technical details. So I don't really understand why we got that. So on that basis, you have to view it as a separate application, and looking at everything, it doesn't stack up. So I don't, buy that one that we'd be laughed out of court by an inspector, because it's already been done, put to bed, and this is now a new application, and it's still not satisfactory. But in terms of the condition that you talked about, again, I think we need to be firmer about the condition, that whilst they need to give us the instructions, we need to say, but it has to take into account Thames Water's position.
Thank you, Chair. So just to be absolutely clear, it's a full application, so yes, it is a new application, but you cannot ignore the very highly material consideration of the appeal for effectively the same development. So the inspector has already concluded, so it's two different routes to the same development, and the inspector has already given a view on that and has concluded on that point. So if the council were to refuse on those grounds, as Greg's already explained, we would lose that, and we would have costs awarded against, because it wouldn't just be on the partial point of specifically the highways, it would now be on the whole appeal, the fact that we've brought an appeal or brought a situation where the applicant needs to appeal the situation. So again, we wouldn't often say it in those terms, but this is as clear cut as it could possibly be in terms of that particular part. In terms of the sewage condition, so condition 22, again, I don't think there's a more robust position that can be taken on the basis that, just pick up the relevant condition, condition 22, which is that it's actually a no development shall commence on the site. So it's not even based on prior occupation, reflecting the fact that it is a greenfield site. It's actually saying no development shall happen until details of those works for disposal of foul drainage have been submitted, and then following on from that, the dwelling shan't be occupied until those approved drainage details have been fully implemented. So I can't think of or advise of a way that you could make that condition more robust.
We have, yeah, sorry, thank you. Right, I read the report, but I didn't go through all the conditions, so that you're right. That the report said it had an argument about it not being particularly relevant, but this actually says, so I will withdraw that comment is there. But I'll still leave it that I have to then say, why on earth has this application come to DC then, if we can't actually do anything with it?
That's simply reflective of the number of objections that have been received and the fact that our delegation is effectively removed on that basis. So we can't approve something under delegation when there's been that many objections. That's just part of the constitutional arrangements.
It's been moved for refusal. I haven't seen a seconder yet. Is there a seconder for refusal? Councillor Freeman. Before I go to the vote on it, would anybody else like to speak on it? Councillor McCormick.
I think we're in an extremely difficult position in this one. Personally, I really don't see the point of granting approval for something that can't be built due to sewage capacity issues and Thames Water. But the letter of the law is such that I would feel obliged to support the recommendation, even though it goes against, my basic instinct to do that, because I really don't see the point in giving approval for something that might not be built in the foreseeable future.
Thank you. Been moved and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? 3. And so that motion has, goes against refusal. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I make that 6. That motion 7. Yeah, that adds up to 10. Good. That motion has failed. Is there a second motion? Councillor Faulkner. And is there a seconder for that? Councillor Rattigan. Thank you. Moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour of approval? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And those against? 4. Thank you. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm that application is approved subject to the completion of a legal agreement in accordance with the conditions in the agenda paper. Thank you, Chair.
That's the last one, isn't it? It is. That's it. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you to the officers for all their work. And thank you, everybody, for the last year. Whether I'm sat here or over there next month is down to you. Thank you.